Hello everyone, I'm Camille, and I'm going to be speaking about front-end development. Does anyone have any notion or kind of already has an idea of what front-end development is? Okay, so that's a good general gist of you. So what is front-end? Front-end mainly composes of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So the analogy that I like to go with, so HTML is like your skeleton. It's the bones of your web page. CSS is the skin. It basically what gives what makes it look nice. And the JavaScript is the muscle, the functionality within the web application or site. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It defines the structure and the content. It's very, very literal. So you just use put your content in tags like hello world and then put it in between paragraph or header tags depending on what you need. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, not CSS. It adds style elements and defines the layout of the web page. With new advances in web technologies, CSS3, which is the most recent CSS language, it adds capabilities like fancy things like animations, media queries for responsiveness, and flex boxes. And JavaScript. So JavaScript deserves its own side because it's arguably the most useful language. You can use it in web dev, you could use it backend specifically for Node.js, and even some robots use JavaScripts. And HTML is more of a markup language. CSS is more about styling it, but neither of them actually contribute to the functionality of your web application. So JavaScript is kind of like the object-oriented-ish programming part of web application, because you could define variables, control structure, and within elements in your web application. So some examples are reading text input, handling button presses, making API calls, etc., etc. Another analogy that I like to point out is Java is to JavaScript as cars to carpet. They have no relation to each other. They just happen to have the same key base name. JavaScript is getting more and more popular because there's lots of open libraries are emerging because it's became open source. A lot of frameworks are coming out in the past, let's say 10 years. So it's no longer like your GeoCities 90s websites anymore. JavaScript just blew up into its own giant field of it in itself. And there's a huge developer community, so it's definitely worth your time to learn JavaScript. And here's a quote by JavaScript, the good parts. I think it's relatively understandable, but I feel like this applies to almost all languages in general. It's really subjective. All languages have their pros and their cons. It really just depends on what you need. Cool. If anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. Okay, so typically when you're doing front-end development, you don't need a fancy IDE, you don't need Eclipse, you don't need NetBeans. You could do it in those IDEs, but it's really unnecessary, especially since they're a lot more heavier on your computer, and it just does a lot more unnecessary things that you don't really necessarily need for front-end development. So some popular editors are Sublime, Atom. I personally use Brackets. You could use Pico, if you're a masochist. What else? Vim. So in order to access whatever you're trying to edit, you would open an HTML file, and the Google Chrome specifically has the best render engine called Chrome Developer Tools. And so basically, I would show you it actually. So let's try out Twitter. So basically, I could inspect. If you click inspect, right click and click inspect, you can access this giant embedded JavaScript console, see the actual HTML and CSS of the application. I know basically live edit, even though it's not safe. So I remember when I was little, or in high school, not necessarily little, but we would change things I don't know, something silly hello hello Harambe, and I was like, wow, I'm such an awesome hacker. Like, look at how cool this is. Yeah. And then you would just change the live screen of it and take a screenshot, send it to my friends, hack Twitter, um, cool stuff like that. And then like if you're doing like API requests, where is it? That would be in the network. So you can see all of these requests that it makes to the server. Not necessarily all of them are public because, you know, it's a enterprise or like it's a giant application and there's a lot of security involved. But you can see like basically the calls to the other files as well. What else? Timeline. I don't really use these ones as much. Database, SQL, and a lot of fancy stuff. Oh, and this one. So what's really popular is responsiveness. So it has this little tool called the device toolbar, and you can basically change it to whatever, I guess, uh, dimension or like platform you're trying to use. So Galaxy S5, iPad, and then it basically acts as like a in-browser uh, in-browser like editor. So, and there's like a bunch more devices you can add. Kindle Fire, all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah, this is Chrome. I know Mozilla has like Firebug, but none of them compare to Chrome. Chrome's DevTools. Event listeners. This is the JavaScript console, and this is where you'd access the HTML and CSS. So yeah. So that's the Chrome DevTool. And so I'd like to talk about the document object model, most commonly referred to as a DOM. It's basically what I would call, it's similar to your canvas. So from like an artist's perspective, this is where you're able to manipulate everything on the client side. And then this is a quote, like kind of like the formal definition of what the document object model is. Okay, so the HTML DOM is basically, yeah, as I said, your canvas. It contains all of your HTML elements as JavaScript objects, all the properties, all the stylings, all the methods, and the events. So it's basically your giant interface for your web application. And then there's an entire API for it, in which you can like access and manipulate. You can access this through W3 Schools, and you can also try it out yourself in DevTools, like I showed you. So technically, what I was manipulating there, like that Twitter homepage, that entirety is a DOM. And then asynchronous JavaScript and XML, more commonly known as AJAX, is basically what allows the front end to access the back end. It's basically the communicator, the bridge between it. So web applications need to access the database and the back end, but how do they talk to it? So that's where AJAX and XML HTTP requests come in. So you can retrieve it using an XML HTTP request, which is not as common because it's more raw and the data could often be like lost or manipulated. And then, but most of the time, HTTP, like just pure HTTP requests are the way to go. Asynchronously, so basically asynchronously means it doesn't load it at the same time the web page is loaded. So if you think of synchronized swimming, you know, everything's happening at the same time. So asynchronous is basically in the back, JavaScript is running in its own, making its own HTTP requests and doing its own thing. So JSON. JSON is what's commonly basically the data that comes back from the servers. So after you make your HTTP requests, a JSON is basically all the data that you receive. So you have all this, and it's, yeah, commonly it's called JavaScript object notation. And usually it's just a giant array of data or a hash table or a list. And yeah, you use it to, so once you have all this data, that's from that, you can use that to display it however you like on your web application. And since, you know, we're all about applied learning, I made a little tiny project for you guys. So if you go onto this link, github.com, CPP CSS front-end project, you guys are going to make like a little tiny, really simple website. So I made one for Guy Fieri. And basically, if you guys are looking at it, I don't know if you guys are accessing it that well, but if you have GitHub, you could just clone the repository. You can just clone the repo, and if you don't, you could just download as a zip right here. So basically, I just gave you a bunch of empty files for you to manipulate. Like, see, it's like completely empty. And then you have your final. If you need like help, basically referencing like how do I, make the image appear and stuff like that. There's a final result which you can reference in case you get stuck. So yeah, let's go over the structure of an HTML web page. So as you can see, everything's based in tags. So you have the top HTML tags, and everything within it is considered HTML. The web browser recognizes everything within it. So head is typically more so metadata. So you have your title, which is basically the title that appears, on your Chrome tab. You need to link it to your style sheet, which is your CSS files, and your JavaScript. So basically, if you're linking files, it'd be under link, and if it's specifically a JavaScript file, you put it under script. And then same with if you're embedding any JavaScript, it'd be within the same tags. And for CSS, it would be style. So the way CSS and HTML are very, very literal, as you can tell. All you need is you just need to identify what exactly you want to manipulate, and then add the asset or trait to it. And then metadata is basically, so this is more so for search result optimization. So when someone searches up your name, the browser would technically look for your metadata. So in this case, the description is my first website. So what would appear under Google search? It'd be like, the link to your web application, and then under it is this description, my first website. And then within the body is your actual HTML, which is what appears under the application. So it's just hello world, and H stands for header, so it just come up in the largest size font. Yeah, I also made another project, but I feel like you guys a lot of you guys don't have your laptops, so I shouldn't have done this. But basically, it's just a text compare. I may have it live right here. So basically, I type in something like Computer Science Society and Computer Science Department. And what it would do is just compare and see the percentage of how much similar they are like. It's relatively simple, but it's really just to show you that a little bit more about JavaScript. So the first project was more to show you how to manipulate HTML and CSS and see its syntax. This one's more so how to use JavaScript. So given two text documents, you can import them. It uses a technique called Cosine Similarity. I don't know if you guys have taken 214. I'm just taking for granted that you guys have. But basically, it converts the text into a vector, and then the element of each vector appears in each document. So the percentage similarity is essentially the cosine of the angle, which is usually a positive. It's basically binary, 0 or 1. This is a typical like machine learning method that I already wrote it for you, but you should be able to like fill out the functions. I just made a boilerplate for you, and it's all on the GitHub if you guys want to try it out. And so what's next? So we barely scratched the surface of it. I assumed I'd have more time if you guys brought your laptops, but it's okay. Here are some tips on what to do next. So there's lots of resources. Like I myself learned a lot of front-end web application development through the internet because you know we don't have a class for it specifically. I know CIS does, but that doesn't count towards our curriculum. So it's basically it's just a matter of teaching yourself. A lot of industry, even like the big four, it's all web-based. Not Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and what was the last one? Google. Yeah, they're basically all web, so like it's unavoidable essentially. A lot of you are probably going to end up in doing some sort of web just cuz that's businesses just need business logic, just needs solutions and that solve their business logic problems. Yeah, so CSS3 makes it easier to define fluid and responsive layouts. Basically, you're able to do all these fancy things with all the newer technologies that's come out. And then check out Node.js and JavaScript. You could build a server. If you guys went to the backend server, the backend workshop, Brian delved more into this, but you can connect to databases and basically build your entire application in JavaScript, which is usually a lot easier to do than having a backend in Java because you don't have all these conflictions with your data types. And so these are some modern industry tools that I haven't covered. So let's see what we have. So you have Bootstrap, which is a framework and also like a library in a sense. So basically, it helps you get your website or your web application started. It does all this tooling for you. UIKit does the same thing. Ember, Angular, JS, and React. So these are all like front-end frameworks. React is more of a library, but basically it allows for this really cool thing called two-way data binding, in which you don't have to call upon the backend through JavaScript, and it would just automatically do it for you because of this. Angular is Google's product, and React is Facebook's. And then, so SAS and LESS, those are, so SAS stands for stylistically awesome sheets. These are both CSS preprocessors, not necessarily preprocessors in the way the CS department does it. It's just basically compiles it into CSS. So basically, it's a lot more easier if you're doing a lot more CSS development. Backbone.js is also a framework. Gulp, Grunt, Bower, and Component. So these are all JavaScript task runners. So a lot of times as your web applications get bigger and bigger, say a site like eBay. eBay has all these different web pages that they can't do all the boilerplate and compile it all by themselves. So basically you'd have to use these tools like Grunt and Gulp to compile it and get all your SAS and LESS sheets, basically take your web application and do a lot of automation for you. So that's what they all do. And man, that little guy all the way up there, basically is like a wrapper for all of these above. So you could just install Yeoman and it would install all of these for you. And Jquery so that's a library built on top of JavaScript. It's basically it's syntactically easier than vanilla JavaScript if for manipulating the elements in your DOM. So say you have an element that you want to like animate. jQuery can do that really quickly in like one line of code, whereas JavaScript would require a lot more. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? You guys are relatively quiet. Yeah.
So all this front-end development is just about making the user interface?
No, not necessarily. That's like the main bulk of it, but you're also accessing data from the back. You're basically communicating. So I like to think of a web application as a restaurant. So your data is the fridge, your backend logic is the chef that arranges the food and the data in a certain way, and then your front end is the waiter. So the waiter serves it, gets the actually it's the waiter, and then like the design UX, what you're talking about is more so like the face of the restaurant, the atmosphere, and then like for things that you don't want to keep going back and making orders for. So like water, that's something you'd put in your cache, so you don't have to keep requesting access to the backend. Does that kind of help? That was kind of just an overall view of like web and how front end kind of plays into it. So front end is basically everything on the client side. So everything that you're able to see in your normal like website. So like this, plus like I guess a simple logic inside of it. So if you go to sources, go into the JavaScript. So this is all front end. It basically manipulates the data that you have on your client side, and back end is more so the server side. So basically, if I wanted to implement like a um, login logout system, uh, take in data from the user and store it somewhere, that would require a backend. So it's basically uh, a lot more to do with what's available on. So since this data is like live, like I can just scrape this document and then compare it to each other. So I don't need like a backend to store. Like I'm not storing Computer Science Society anywhere. That's why. So that's like, does that kind of help? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you can use Visual Studio too. Oh, well, you could if it's like something relatively small, but as your applications get bigger, you're gonna find yourself linking a lot of your JavaScript files and CSS and HTML all together. Um, so usually it's just good practice to just separate them all. It's usually like thought of as bad to like embed your styling and your JavaScript within the HTML document. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, you could use GitHub if you want to make your website live. You could use your CPP web space, which is like usually like cpp.edu, the little squiggly, and then your Bronco name. What else is free? Or you could just pay for your own like web space. But yeah, that you just upload it into the ZFS. Yeah, you can do that. I know someone who did do it. I personally don't use um, uh, the web space. I use GitHub Pages. Oh no. Okay, I guess it's not available. So like GitHub Pages allows you to basically your URL is going to be whatever your GitHub username is .github.io. So similar to CSS cpp.github. Oh no, sorry, it's CPP. So like this. This is all on GitHub. It doesn't. GitHub also, if you're gonna like make an entire application, you can't. GitHub Pages can't do that. Like it only can do static pages like this, where it's just like displaying information. Yeah. No, it goes to the section that it is. I would go more into the syntax, but oh, actually, I do have a lot of time left. Okay. So let's take a look at this page. So the way CSS and HTML works, since it's very literal, so I can inspect this. I see, oh, this A is basically a link. It links to this index.html hashtag about. And hashtag about goes to this. And if I inspect this, it has, where is it? The ID about. So it's basically similar to classes in a sense, not necessarily like more like as complex, but you basically just assign uh, elements within HTML IDs or classes. You can have only one ID, but you can have multiple classes with the same name. Um, what else? Yeah. guess I could show you the, or so, like mine. So mine is a little fancy. I was playing with particles.json. So if I go to sources, where is it? Scripts. Yeah. Oh no, here it is. So the cool thing about JS, because it's open source, so particles, everything you can basically utilize any library that you can find online. If it has a JS after it, it probably exists. That's the rule of thumb. So this is this really cool library called particles, and basically you could just add like these little fancy floating things that I put on my website to your web page. You could add like on click events, add more particles, and just do lots of fancy stuff with it. Has anyone ever done front end before? Oh, okay. Did you guys know about all like Yeoman and all that? Okay, cool. And yeah, I think that's all I have for you. But if you guys want to try out the projects, it's on front end projects, and basically I tell you like what you need. You just clone the repository, you download it if you don't have Git, and just fill in the blanks. So yeah, so we're gonna upload it to this. Where is it? Meeting PowerPoints. So all the past PowerPoints are available in here, including the database and the backend, and then we're gonna add the front end in later. Yeah, so yeah, projects are definitely the way to go. You don't become an Olympian through gym class. You do it by stuff you do outside of class. Yeah. Yeah, so it's just like a mix of everything. There's so much resources online. I think one of the best resources that I found is Bento. Basically, it provides you with this entire like library in a sense for like anything that you want. So say you only want to do front end, side click front. Oh, close all of these. And it'll show me all the library and tools that you would need to get started in front end. So Sass, Less. In industry, Sass is regarded as like better than Less. D3. Oh, D3 is really cool. So D3 is like this data visualization tool. Oh no. Okay. So I guess specifically if you're going to more so like, well, it's used in like everywhere actually. Data science, more so than others. Machine learning. It's really just for displaying really cool things like, let's get this tree map. And this is all completely in JavaScript. And you can do all these little fancy things. So this is a tree map. Let's open it up. Can I open this? No. Yeah. So they're dynamic data visualization, and D3 is basically the library that supports this. And if you want to learn backend, Node, Flask, Python, Ruby, Rails, how to design a RESTful API, some foundational stuff. This is like stuff you learn in CS classes, so I don't think you really need this. So there's a database class, I think. Data structures, big O. Security. Tools is like Git, GitHub, how to deploy your application on Heroku. R, this is more like language for like doing data science. And these are basically how to use tools. What else? Web framework. Okay, I don't think these ones are available yet. Oh, storage. Okay, yeah, this is database-wise. So SQL, PostgreSQL, Json, like what I covered, Mongo, Elastic. These are all like popular NoSQL frameworks. Yeah. It's gonna be github.com/cpp-css. Yeah. Is anyone particularly interested in trying out the projects, like the text compare or the personal website? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So it's really up to you. Bootstrap does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Let me show it to you. You probably already know the grid system since you're asking this. So basically, Bootstrap gives you these components where when the screen is a certain size, it'll rearrange everything on the screen. So responsiveness is basically how a web browser reacts to the smaller screen. So see how everything converted to this little hamburger icon? That's what's called responsiveness. And then there's also another term called cross-browser compatibility, which is basically it's given. So like if it works on Edge or Mozilla, not that anyone uses any of those. And so you could also use, if you're doing like more fancy stuff, like let's check out CPP GDDC. No, hold on. Give me a second. Where did I put this? I can't remember what it's called. CPP Game Dev Club. Okay, CPP Game Dev. So in this case, this doesn't use Bootstrap at all. This is all like, in a sense, hand coding and using media queries. So basically what I did is that once it reaches a certain size, I put it all, and it all appears in this little handmade burger icon. So yeah, it's really up to your personal preference. If you're in a rush, if you're at a hackathon, tools like Bootstrap, Meteor, all these other frameworks come in really handy. But yeah, check out Bento. It's really just a collection of all the resources that you'll probably find online. Code Academy is definitely really helpful because you're actually live coding. What else? There's like Coursera. Dash? What's Dash? Oh, that's a General Assembly's thing. Basically, there's a lot of online resources that you can use to teach yourself. Yeah. I would recommend it for learning the syntax, but when you actually want to build something, don't use Code Academy because, so the thing is, Code Academy kind of holds your hand, and you want to be able to write like programs and stuff by yourself. So after you use Code Academy to learn the syntax, just a general gist. Like most of the time, no one remembers all the HTML tags, so it's fine to like reference them, but just to get the general like structure, like how to use, how CSS is written and HTML, I'd use Code Academy for that. But I think the best way to learn is through projects. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, you could use Bootstrap. There's also other libraries for that. If I'd say Bootstrap, yeah, because I know there's like Foundation and Semantic UI. There's a lot of Google Material Design has their own framework that you can use. Yeah, and it basically provides you with all these components that you can use for your application. So another cool thing you could do with web dev is this thing called Phonegap. So say you want to make an Android application or iPhone application, but you don't want to do the work twice. You'd have to learn Swift or Objective-C as well as Android. Phonegap does this really awesome thing of wrapping your web application and making it making it mobile app, making a mobile app out of it. This is built on top of Apache Cordova, I believe. And basically, you only have to write code once. So it's if you're yeah, go ahead. Uh, yeah. So you can write a web application like um, say you just want a web application for people in the club to check in, so they can do it on their laptops. Plus, if you use PhoneGap, wrap it in the iOS or Android or whatever I guess platform you're trying to use. Um, then yeah, it basically cuts down a lot of work. Or Windows Phone too. Yeah. So you don't have to do write code in one go. Plus, it's also readily available for desktop or as well. Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah. EMC. Yeah, is that the Emacs? Emac. Oh, ES6, right? Yeah. I personally haven't, but I know there's so many tools in JavaScript. It's so hard to keep up. Honestly, all the things I've showed you is probably gonna be gone within the next couple, or like the industry moves so fast that you really just have to learn how to learn. It's not like learning the depths of Angular or the depths of like Node.js. It's just learning how to pick up things very quickly, and that's what being a CS is. That's what I guess CS is teaching us. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? Comments?
So, the languages we learn like Java, JavaScript, do you think that they're gonna become like outdated?
No, I don't think so. Well, government still uses like COBOL and like really old stuff, so it's not. It's not. There's not a huge like rush specifically for object oriented stuff, but in terms of web, in the past 5 to 10 years, it's been changing rapidly. Like a couple years ago, every big industry company was using Angular, but now everyone's shifting towards React because Angular updated to Angular 2, and it looks like nothing alike. So it's really hard to update giant enterprise applications. Yeah, like eBay still is mainly a Java shop, so is Amazon. Um, yeah, so I feel like the industry is mainly web and mobile, just because that's what people can access and need. Like it's reachable to everyone, and then like all the fancy stuff like machine learning and AI, that's really just on top of it. Like as you can see, like I built something using like a machine learning like algorithm on top of my front end. So it's not necessarily you're stuck doing this. Like I know a lot of times people are like HTML and CSS is like relatively like very simple, not as like complex as fancier stuff, but um, in reality, that's all businesses need. Yeah, cool. Yes, that's it.